And right up, we're going to be moving to our first panel discussion. We're going to be having a youth-led conversation on emotional responses to intergenerational injustice. And this is going to be hosted by young people from SCORE Scotland and Teach the Future. We also have a young person joining us from Passion for Fusion Youth Club. And so we're quite excited to let young people kind of share with us their experiences, and they're going to be focusing on 3 questions. So the first of these questions is, what do you feel older generations do not understand about growing up in the world today? So I feel that's quite a pertinent question. What emotions does the climate crisis evoke in young people? And finally, do you feel that all young people have an equal voice in the climate crisis? Do young people have an equal voice as older generations? So following on from this conversation, the chat box function will be open. So if you have any questions or comments, you can put them in there. And I'm now going to hand over to the group for introductions. Thank you.
Hi everyone, so I'm Anna from Teach the Scotland. I'm 18 years old. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be kind of helping to host this panel. I'm one of the campaign coordinators for Teach the Future Scotland, and I am a member of Fridays for Future Scotland. I'm also a Speak Out champion for Girl Guidance Scotland. I'm now going to pass on to Lily to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm 16 years old. I'm from Venice. Like Anna, I'm also a campaign coordinator at Teach the Future Scotland and a volunteer with Fridays for Future Scotland as well. I'll pass it on to Ailey.
Hi, I'm Ailey. I'm 17 and I'm also from Inverness. I am a volunteer for Teach the Future Scotland. I'll pass it on to Leah.
Hi, I'm Leah. I'm 14 and I'm from Glasgow. And I'm also a volunteer at Teach the Future and a volunteer at Fridays for Future Scotland. I'll pass on to Aisha.
Hi, I'm Aisha. I'm 16. I'm a member of KCYC Youth Club. I'll pass on to Mahmoud.
Hi, I'm Mahmoud. I'm 14. I'm a youth at the Noughts and Crosses Youth Club at SCORE Scotland. And you may know me from the last event. I hosted the anti-capitalism panel, so it's good to be back. So if we move on with the panel, so the first question for the panel is, what do you think older generations do not understand about growing up in the world today?
I think that a lot of older generations have a view of children as like people who are like very carefree and don't really have anything to worry about, and life only kind of gets difficult when you're like an adult. And I feel like especially for our generation that's really not the case. With climate change is like the world that we're growing up into, as well as like so much going on in the internet. And yeah, so it's a lot, and I think they don't always understand that.
Yeah, definitely. We know, our generation knows so much because we can find the answers we need with a click of a button. And with that, like with being able to know so much, it comes with the pressure of seeing how our world is decaying because of climate change. And when you see that, you want to do something about it. And yeah, yeah, we know so much. We have access to so much that it comes with a greater pressure.
Yeah, I think that comes with a bit of a misunderstanding of what we use technology for. Like, as soon as you become aware of something, the purpose of technology completely changes, and it's really difficult to convey that to older generations sometimes.
Like what Ailey was saying, I think a lot of older generations like don't understand that they put like everything on us, kind of like they say like it's your responsibility to deal with this, since you know like you're the ones who will be affected by that, which is fair. But like at the end of the day, we are still quite young, and we do need them to like also put in effort to try and like do like protest and like show that they support what we're doing, but they usually like take a couple of steps back.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's this current expectation, I think, of all the generations that we as young people we're going to solve climate change, we're going to do all these things. But in reality, we shouldn't have to be the ones focusing on trying to solve the climate crisis to solve it. We should all be in school just focusing on our education. And that's really not the case. I know there's so many young people here today that are part of the movement, part of like the climate movement, which is frankly ridiculous. We're 16 years old. We shouldn't be striking to save our future. Surely that should be the adults' responsibility, not ours.
Yeah, someone in the chat has said, I think older generations have more experiences than youngsters. And that is right, but we grew up in a world where it's fast changing. I speak to someone 2 years younger than me, so I'm 18. If I speak to someone 2 years younger, they have a very different experience, even to me who's only 2 years older, for example, with small things like what was your first phone and what was your introduction to technology like in your first few years of school. It rapidly changes, and we live in a world where we wake up and something different happened every day, and it's extreme events. I was born a year after 9/11. We live in that post-world. We lived in the war on terrorism. We grew up under these circumstances, and we grew up in a world who doesn't listen to each other, and we grew up in a very different world because of technology and many other aspects. We may not have the same experiences, but we have a lot of different ones, and I think the biggest benefit to everyone would be to listen to each other's generational experiences and not just dismiss experiences and what people know because of age.
Yeah, I definitely agree that older generations have more experience because you've had longer on this earth. You have longer time to experience things, but we need to come together and work together with both of our experiences, find out a solution for climate change and work together, because it's not going to work if it's just one generation trying to fix it.
Yeah, there's so much pressure, I think, on us as a generation to solve these issues that in many cases could have been solved decades ago. We've known about climate change a lot longer than I've been alive and on this planet. Why is it now we're only just realizing it? And why is it up to the young people? There is hundreds of climate activists, thousands probably older than me, that have been shouting about this for years. But why is it still my problem to solve? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'd love to solve the climate crisis. Don't get me wrong, I would like to have a future. But it's just so much pressure to try and solve something so huge at such a young age when we don't have the experience to do this. We've never faced something like this before.
I think that's the thing. I think that's one of my biggest battles. Like, I think it's great that we're more aware and we have more access to information. I think one of the worst parts is that constant pressure and worry and anger you feel about all these things. And I think it's really weird. It creates weird relationships with families and parents and older generations, I think, because like we are 15, 16, 17, 18, and we know all these things. And it's a total change in dynamic. It didn't used to be like that, but young people are so aware now, and it creates pressure on this. But older generations also don't understand, and I think on a lot of issues, we have a very different view on them. And we're very much about overall interest instead of self-interest, which can create confusing boundaries.
Yeah, another thing I think older generations might not understand is how a lot of youth are now very politically aware. I understand for when they were growing up, they didn't have social media or to the extent we have now. So they didn't have all the information. They didn't have all these scandals coming out about different party members and different policies of each party. And I mean, I'm allowed to vote now in Scotland because I'm 16. I'm going to be voting in the 6th of May election. But a lot of people still think, oh, they're not very politically aware. They're young. I wasn't politically aware when I was their age. But I feel like times have changed a lot, and now the majority of young people are very politically aware.
One of the key things I remember is from as soon as I kind of started becoming political aware when I was maybe 13, 14, one of the things that I was told is, oh, that's just because you're young. As you'll grow up, you'll become more right-wing, or your opinions will change and you'll learn as you grow up. That's not how the world can be. It's too wishful thinking.
Yeah, from that point, I think that older generations think that, you know, our sort of age group is either too young to be discussing these sort of serious conversations, or either too old to be doing anything that's remotely childish. So since we're at such a tough age and our voices and people don't really understand how we feel, it's up to us to show how we feel about climate change, for example.
Yeah, I think like the perception of what a child is has changed. What's a child? What's a teenager? What's an adult? Like my mum left school when she was 15 and went straight into a job. I'm 18, I'm at university, I live at home. It's very different, and that is generational change, and that is how the world works. And I think with that comes political change. Like I often get told, well, that's just how politics is, that's how the world is. And it's like, no, but if you look at all the things that have changed over time, rights for LGBTQI people, segregation, stuff has changed, and that's because people did something. But I think it's this time because it's people so young wanting to change it, and that people so young are aware. It's that really weird boundary because half the world thinks we should still be children, we should be playing with toys, we should be going outside, we should be having fun. And half the world thinks, oh, you're 16, 17, 18, you should be at work. And no one can decide where we fit in society. And you add the political opinions on top of that, and you add the need for change on top of that, it creates a really weird dynamic. Prosper, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, thanks. I'm Prosper, I'm 14, and I'm from Passion Fusion. It's a football group. I've been listening to what you guys have been saying, and I agree. Like, they see young people as people who are too small to do anything, that we should be playing with toys instead of like helping change the world. And I feel like thanks to things like this, that our voice can be heard more.
I also think it's such like a different experience that we're having from them. Like no other generation has really had like the fear that when we grow up, like the world is going to be falling to pieces. And it is like, it's so different from what they could have been experiencing. And I just think that's going to be like hard to understand for anybody.
Yeah, like I think it's really weird. Like you have people who aren't aware, but also like as soon as you start learning about the climate crisis, it's like there's this giant thing. And to people, it's in the future. It's not my problem. But for us, it's if this isn't fixed now, it's a problem in the future. But the thing is, it's not a problem in the future. It's a problem now. We're just thinking of this problem's future because by that point, there's no solutions to it. The problem is now because now is the time we have the time to produce the solutions.
I think for me personally, it's a spiraling fear that seems to have occurred that I'm not going to have a future if I don't solve the climate crisis. But then I've got all the generations telling me, oh no, it's fine, we're going to solve it. You can solve it once you get out of school. But by that point, we're hitting the climate targets. We're hitting the times that we should have reduced the emissions. Are we currently? No. So what am I meant to do? It's this weird circumstance that seems to have appeared that we're getting told that it's all going to get sorted, but nothing's getting sorted currently. And I think it does come back down to the politician side of things. We do get treated like young people, and that we're stupid at points and we're not politically aware, when I would say that is absolutely completely wrong. We're all young people sitting on this panel. We're clearly at least slightly politically aware in some way to be even taking part in this conversation. And it just baffles me how that we can have adults turning around and telling us you can't vote, you shouldn't be voting because you're young, because you're 16, but then we're also expected to solve this problem that if we don't solve, we lose our future. How does that make any sense, I suppose?
Yeah, like age is such a funny thing because they're like, you're too young to do this, but also young people solve the problem. I think one of the most annoying things for me is when people are like, oh, well, we need more young people in politics. And I'm like, this is the issue though. There are people in politics who want to change, but the system is built not to change. And that creates more, right? I sit in meetings and people are like, oh, become a politician, join a party, make the change from within. That doesn't work. People have tried that since the 1970s when we knew climate change was a thing. Like, the system is broken and it just creates more worry because you're 14, 15, 16 learning the system is broken. In a society where you're taught that young people should listen and not kind of speak up.
Yeah, I agree with the system being sort of broken in a sense. In my opinion, government is being run sort of like a company nowadays. If it doesn't make money, then it can't work. It can't keep the country afloat. It can't keep us. It can't keep our economy as high as possible. So when it comes to things like climate change, why would we invest in solar power when it might not work? It might not be as reliable as oil has been for us. Oil has been something that's fundamental for us, guns, nuclear power. So it's a step in the dark, which politicians are very nervous and hesitant to take. But it is a step that has to be taken eventually, or it's going to have drastic consequences.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think because like a lot of people like refuse to grasp the fact that oil and like shale oil and all that stuff is like finite, which isn't. I guess we should like move to the next question now. So next question is, what emotions does the climate crisis evoke in young people?
I feel like we've kind of intersected that with the previous conversation about how a lot of it is anger and a lack of like confusion and just why aren't you doing this? Because like you made a really good point, like the government right now is kind of modeled like a business instead of a government.
I think that's like really evokes a lot of frustration in a lot of people, since like a lot of politicians don't really like know, they're not like completely the most qualified people to deal with it, which is like really annoying, since it depends on like who everyone collectively votes for, and it takes a long time to change things like this when we don't really have a long time.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's such a sense of anger that is evoked from the climate crisis and this inevitable problem that we're going to have to face. But then from that anger, it turns into anxiety because we're anxious about our future and what's going to be ahead. And then there's just so many sense of emotions that are out there. But then I think for me, there's also a lot of empowerment that young people are standing up for the future. We're taking the action that we need because no one else is going to do it. We can't rely on others, so we're just going to take it into our own hands and try and solve it ourselves.
Yeah, I just want to touch on a point that Aisha said, that the government aren't always the most qualified to deal with these types of situations. And we've seen that with the pandemic, because the people who are qualified, the scientists, are not being listened to. We wouldn't be coming out of another lockdown if they were being listened to. And I think the government needs to listen to the people and what they're saying about climate change and how we can, and especially scientists, how we can stop it.
And I think it's because like the government like usually puts like societal issues or like superficial like short-term issues in front of more long-term things, like for example like bringing us out of lockdown for school and things.
Yeah, we kind of replace one crisis with another. It's a bit of a continuous cycle. We put climate change action on hold for the pandemic, and then we put the pandemic on hold for getting kids to school, and it's kind of a cycle. Prosper, what do you think? What does it kind of make you feel about the climate crisis?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear what you said.
What emotions does the climate crisis make you feel?
I think it makes a lot of like young children worried, because like I feel worried about it. Like we need to help like solve the future now instead of just like leaving it to grown-ups because they think we're too young. But most of us are like really worried, and we have to like try and help and do more things so we'll be noticed.
Yeah, it's kind of worry, and then for me, anger that we have to be worried about it.
There's also there's also like a strange sense of like uselessness, which is like really strange because it's a problem we shouldn't have to deal with anyway. But definitely for me, what drove me to join Fridays for the Future and things was because like the climate anxiety and like feeling like I wasn't doing enough when it's a problem that we shouldn't be dealing with anyway is definitely another emotion that it brings.
Yeah, I think like tying into that, how like we shouldn't be dealing with it, it like makes it you feel kind of like quite dejected and hopeless to think the people who should be dealing with it just like brush it under the rug and just ignore it and put it off when we're like really trying. So it's just like really frustrating and like annoying.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's very frustrating, and it does almost feel like we're not doing enough. We're constantly not doing enough because nothing is happening. When in reality, we are doing loads. We're trying, and it does make the little things that we accomplish like so much more amazing.
Yeah, it kind of feels like screaming into the void sometimes. Like, you're like, we have the solutions. The scientists are telling you this. The people are fine with this. Why aren't we doing this? And I think, like, I hate when people say, like, oh, young people are so inspiring. Like, how empowering it is to see youth take action. And I'm like, if we're inspiring, why haven't you took the action? And I don't know, like there's worry, there's stress, there's frustration, there's anger. And I feel like all of it is just comes from us being like, we need to do this. You're not understanding we need to do this. But you're saying, yeah, the climate crisis is a problem. So why aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. I think building off what you're saying there about inspiring, I've done a couple of interviews for my local paper in the past, and that is such a common question. Oh, you're so inspiring. How are you going to solve the future? Does your future look like? And it's just so stupid. I don't want you to be inspired by me. I want you to be angry that at least at the strikes that I take part in, I'm skipping my education to tell you that there is a big issue called climate change that you aren't solving. So why aren't you doing it? Don't ask me stupid questions, solve the issues, because I really don't want to be doing it. But yet here I am actually trying to do something. And it's not just me, there's so many people trying to do this. And at points we get overshadowed by the adults, we get overshadowed by so many other issues within a society. The climate crisis as a whole is the pandemic, I think someone was saying earlier, has put climate change on hold, and then our education got put on hold, and now that's the new priority. And before you know it, it's going to be too late. And that just makes me so angry and so upset that we are, as Anna said, screaming into a void, screaming into what feels like an endless hole that we need to solve, or we lose our future.
Yeah, it's kind of like we know we need our education in the future. We know we need the skills and to go to university or college or apprenticeships or get jobs. But we also know that there is no future if climate change isn't solved. So it's a constant battle. Mohammed, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that it is very clear that there is lots of frustration. You can see that in the protests, the young people screaming and shouting for their voices to be heard, because it is very serious in our eyes. Because the way we see it, it's either we either skip a couple of days of our education, or we face what could be Armageddon. You know, if we don't solve this, then the world will fall to pieces. Why aren't we solving this? It's a massive problem that we're digging our own grave, in a sense, that the world, climate change, the world is warming up because we're using fossil fuels, and yet we continue to use fossil fuels. So we're digging our own grave. It's very hypocritical, and it is something that definitely frustrates young people like me.
Yeah, there's this really good question in the chat, which is, do you feel like you're equals in a movement having to fight in the shadows, or that the baton has been handed over in relation to other climate change activists?
So I feel like that works really well with our third question, which is, do you feel all young people have an equal voice in the climate crisis? And also, do you think young people have an equal voice to older generations? So do you think you have the same amount, an equal voice to other young people? And do you feel like you have an equal voice to older people?
I think a lot of people, like a lot of us don't have equal voices, and there's like a lot of factors in that, like probably like race and not gender, but like social class, things like that, like, and like just the fact that a lot of people just don't get the opportunities. So I think that impacts how many of us actually can say something about this, like freely and openly, where people actually listen to us, because I don't think it happens like enough, and it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I feel like we don't have like equal voices to adults, but young people all have equal voices, but some people choose not to use their voice as much as others. Like in my high school, there's like some children like who aren't really bothered with climate change and who are littering like every day. And then there's other people who are doing stuff with the government and politicians to help with climate change. And I think like all young children should be using their voices more. Because if we all use our voices, the adults like can't ignore us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of bringing it back to the protests and stuff, that's what made them so powerful. You got a bunch of people together on the streets, and it showed that we do care about this issue. We do care about the climate crisis, and we are sick of being overshadowed by older generations. I know within meetings that I've gone to that may have older people at it, when it's not that many, you do get overshadowed, you do get pushed down, and it can be quite disheartening to not have your opinions counted, because you might not have enough experience, or you might not, have dealt with this issue in the past and whatnot. But surely we should all be learning how to solve this together, because it's not been done in the past, and it has just been left up to us.
Yeah, I think you find in meetings like this really good point. For young people to be heard, we need like double of the amount of young people than there is the amount of adults. Like we have ideas, for example, Fridays for Future Scotland, and we've run for nearly 2 years now. We have local group networks set up. We kind of know what we're doing. But you go into space with adults and the ideas are dismissed. You say an idea is dismissed, and then 5 minutes later an adult repeats that idea and is accepted. Or you have structures built and people dismiss these structures. People dismiss your ideas because you're a young person. And I don't know if it's always intentional. I don't know if it's a generational thing. But we try. I'm in spaces where we say to adults, you are not working with the youth well enough. You need to include us. Here is how we want you to do this. Here is how you can. We tell them, and it still doesn't happen. And I don't know if it's kind of stuck in their way thing, or they've done this for so long they feel like this works fine. But for me, at least, it's a show that you have done this for so long, and the most attention it got was when the 40,000 kids striked from school in Scotland. That was the most media attention it got. It was when 500,000 people showed up outside COP25 in Madrid a few years ago. And like the youth brought it forward, the youth made it intergenerational. And the youth want to work with adults, but we feel pushed out of the aspects, which is why we have youth-only spaces. And it makes it difficult. It's not a case of like Gen First, what can older generations do to fully include young people? When we speak to older generations, we tell them, we ask them. If they're not including us, we do tell them and we speak up about that, and it doesn't change.
Yeah, for older generations need to listen, like, to us and listen to our ideas and come with their own ideas, and we can work together for it. We need to work together, and we need to be listened to, and we need to be included.
I think like the whole older generations like pushing younger people down is the fact that a lot of older people see younger people as like a nuisance, or like we're there to like steal the spotlight, or like we don't know what we're talking about. And the fact that they have more, like they know more, and like all they need to do, if they know more, surely they could share what their knowledge with us, so then we'd all kind of be on a more equal standing.
Yeah, like we go to school, we come home, we sit on meetings, we organise, we do the work, we skip school to do the work, we do the work on the weekends, we pass exams while doing all this. We feel that we have to do all that. We feel we don't have that choice. Mohammed, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Touching on what Aisha said, the fact that we're either seen as probably a nuisance, or we're either seen as vigilantes, or we're seen as children. We're never been respected as much as, a 40-year-old would respect a 40-year-old. We're not talked to, we're talked down to. So the question is, how do we make ourselves taller? How do we force people to talk to us and not talk down to us? And that is, our protests. But the protests, we've been protesting for years on end now, and it hasn't worked as much as we'd have hoped it would have worked. But we need to make our voices heard, and that's the question.
Yeah, I think that comes back to like how we were saying, like if you're in a space with adults, you automatically bring a lot more young people than you would to a young person's space. If I have a meeting with just young people, I'm like, okay, maybe 1 or 2 people. If it's a meeting I'm going into with 4 adults, you try and have 6 young people, and you try and have more, so there's more of you to push that point out. Some people are asking in the chat, what do you think you can do to persuade your generation to engage in activism where other generations have failed? So people who aren't involved in activism in our generation, how can we persuade, how can we do the bits that older generations failed to do?
I think it would be like really difficult, honestly, to persuade a lot of people, because most people, when they think climate change activism, they think like, oh, recycling, or like, oh, don't take the car. Like it's a very individual thing, like working on your own to make a difference, like together. So you have to like rely on the fact that other people will do the same. But a lot of people think, oh, if everyone's going to do that, I don't have to, when in reality it's like much bigger than just putting a plastic bottle in the blue bin. It's like actually protesting, actively talking about it, like talking to people who have the power to actually change it, instead of just like our like peers. So we need to let people know that like standing up for climate change isn't just like the stuff you did in primary school, like turn off the lights and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think a great example is that so my school knows that I've been a part of the climate movement and I take part in these events and strikes and stuff. I got asked to start a recycling club, which has got nothing to do with climate change. Well, it is, but it's not exactly the type of thing that I'd be up for doing. I want to mobilize people. I want to get everyone involved in these strikes. And I do think social media plays a big part in doing that. It seems to be the biggest way our generation spreads things and finds out news in many cases. I found out a lot of things from Twitter, scrolling that faster than I do from somewhere else or a different app on my phone. And it comes back down to technology, and we really just have to utilize that to make it as powerful as possible. And I think September 20th, when we managed to get 40,000 people in Scotland involved in the protests, was a really good starting point and showed that we can use the media to our advantage. We can do it. It was everywhere at that point. It was on the TV, it was on my phone, Instagram stories, whatever. It was everywhere. And if we can get back up to that level, I think we can really mobilize more people and get more people involved in activism, and really just show that it's not just the stupid recycling bins and turning off the lights like we did in primary school. It's a lot more than that. It's sitting on Zoom calls, it's taking part in these events and having these opportunities that without joining activism and becoming a part of the movement, you probably would never have.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's quite difficult in some cases though, because it's not like the climate movement isn't always accessible to everybody. For example, if you want to attend the strikes, you do kind of need your parents' permission, since it's their legal responsibility to send you to school. And so if not everybody can get that, they can't always attend the strikes. And so we need to make sure that when we do things, we need to make sure it's accessible as possible. So many young people might not have the opportunity to be able to sit on a Zoom call for an hour a day or something like that. So I think it's really important that when we do try to get more people involved, we make sure that they can, and they make sure that they can while maintaining any other responsibilities that they might have.
I think tying back into it being accessible, I think that also goes back to a lot of BME people or people from like lower classes and people who don't have as like much money and financial issues. It makes it like a lot harder for them because a lot of people are just focusing on like immediate issues, kind of, you know?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, we're lucky to have the time to put into climate activism, but a lot of people have to focus on the issues that are affecting them right now in their lives. And we need to make sure it's welcome to all classes and all kinds of people, and it has to be accessible. But I think one of the things is, what do we mean by an activist? Who's an activist? Is it the people who do an organising? Is it the people who maybe don't have the time and effort to put into the organising and the planning, but still show up to every strike as a member of the public? We've engaged them, they're showing up to every strike. They may not be joining and they may not be helping do the mobilising, but they're turning up and they're having their say. There's some other points in the chat as well, quite a lot about diversity of teachers and how teachers can help in solidarity with youth voices and whether or not they respect what we've learned. At the start, a few of us said we were from Teach the Future. We were campaigning to embed climate education for the curriculum because one of the key things is that none of us learned this at school. We learned it ourselves. And us becoming teachers would be great. We have that knowledge, yes, but that's not the solution. Every teacher needs to know it. Prosper, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree. I think like teachers in schools should be doing more to like teach us about climate change instead of just like talking about litter picking and like saving water. We should be having like assemblies, more protests to like encourage young people to like know about this topic because it's like our future it's gonna be.
Yeah, teachers need to have the right training to teach us. They need to be trained about climate change, and climate change needs to be embedded in every subject, because if you just take geography is really the only subject you learn about climate change. If you don't take climate geography, then you're not going to learn about climate change unless you look for that by yourself. I think the majority of my teachers do respect the things that I've learned because they see it as important. They know how important it is for our future. So I definitely think they do respect it and would like to teach more about it.
Touching on that point made by Ailey, it's not the fact that teachers don't want to teach climate change. When I went to primary school, every year we'd have a sustainability project and we'd find one problem that we have with the climate and we'd try to solve it, and we'd make a project and we'd present it to the teachers, to the parents, to the local newspapers, and every year it'd work. We'd find something and we'd solve it. And it's something important because it's not just, oh, as to geography, you learn about climate change. You learn about climate change throughout the year. You don't even need to go to school to learn about climate change. Climate change is something you can see with your own eyes. You can see in Louisiana, in Florida, the rising sea levels have decreased the landmass. So you'll find people who've lost their homes to the sea that's rising. And this is something that's you're able to see, and it's something that is very important. And I also want to touch on something Lily said. She said that recycling is something for little children, and I don't agree with that point. I think that if everybody recycles and everybody picks up their litter, it is crucial, because that's why we've been taught to pick up our litter from such a young age. Because if we don't pick up our litter, then our litter will go to bodies of water, and these bodies of water are they're the habitats to massive ecosystems. And when you damage these ecosystems, it creates an unstable ecosystem. Unstable ecosystem isn't good. I think that's, in the name, unstable is never good. But say if you were to put plastic in a lake, this lake has many little fish. These little fish may be minnows. These minnows, they might eat the plastic. And if the minnows die out, then the larger fish will die. And this will affect the entire lake. The lake won't have any sort of life in it. The algae, which will take over, which will have good effects for the climate in the short term, but in the long term, there won't be any light coming into the lake, and eventually the algae will die. And that's how you kill off an entire lake, an entire ecosystem. That's why it's very important to recycle, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Recycling is really important, and we do all need to do it. But the thing is, I was told to recycle because it's good for the planet. You never learned the details of like what you said about the algae in the lakes and everything that happens, and how recycling was part of proactively fixing a problem. We just learned recycling is good. Like, I did higher geography last year before I started university, and part of that, we did 2 weeks on climate change, and one of the topics in that was actually how climate change is good. That is part of higher geography, how climate change is good. Like, we are being taught these things, and people in the chat are saying about it, learning for sustainability and being included in the GTCS standards. It is included very slightly. LFS has one mention in all of the standards. What's preventing from happening is that teachers don't have the training. It's just bottom of the pile. Like, it's not just climate change education that's the problem. We need to talk about climate change, but we're also not taught basic things. We're not taught, like, even if you look at cycling, we're not really taught cycling anymore. We're not taught about taxis. We're not taught how to apply for jobs. We don't get any of these things. We are taught something and we're told you need to be taught this. We don't know why. Why is this going to help? Why is memorizing a notebook's worth of facts in physics or anything going to help me? Why is memorizing math formulas going to help me? How does it influence me? We're not taught these things. And part of the issue right now is that it's so varied between schools. You go to one school and they're doing loads because the teachers are interested. You go to another school and it's not mentioned.
Yeah, I definitely think we are taught to pass exams. That is so, in later education, so S4, S5, S6, we are taught to, I don't know what that is in England, sorry, but we are taught to pass exams. And I think the reason why teachers are so fast about climate change, or they cannot physically teach us because they don't have the training, and two, they need to make sure we pass this exam. Is their responsibility to teach us how to pass an exam, not how to live in the world. And yeah.
I want to touch on something I think Karin said in the chat. It's that what is preventing secondary schools from doing sustainability projects, and I think it's the curriculum. The problem is the curriculum, because the curriculum is very big and there isn't much room for flexibility. In primary school, it's much smaller. You do maths, English, a bit of PE. Every week you do a single drama lesson. That leaves so much more flexibility for putting in things like the sustainability project. But in secondary school, you've got HFT, maths, English, science, geography, so many things. I wouldn't be able to recite all of them. It's many subjects, and that's why it's preventing us from putting in sustainability projects. But as you go, as you progress in high school and you eventually drop subjects, you begin to study in more depth. So I picked geography for one of my subjects in high school, and we studied climate change. And again, we studied climate change as a whole picture, so we saw benefits. There were actually benefits to climate change, although the benefits were radically outweighed by the negatives. And it's really common sense, but I think we can move on to thinking about how does climate justice intersect with activism for racial justice?
Yeah, definitely. So we're just about finished now, so we're just going to kind of wrap up. There's been lots of really interesting points in the chat, and if you do want to know more, feel free to contact any of us. The whole point is that young people need education, not just to ease our lives, but so everyone knows about it. Part of it was, how do we engage people who aren't involved in the climate movement? Education. If it was included in the curriculum, every person would know about it. And right now, they don't. Intersect was absolutely everything. Racial justice, social justice, every part of life intersects with the climate crisis. Every part of the climate crisis intersects with life. This is why it's such a big problem. So we need to be educated on all aspects of it, not just the science. We need to learn about the climate justice system, because if I'd been taught about it, I would most likely be less worried about it. I find information on the internet and have to research it for myself and read full papers and learn about it, so I'm less worried and figure out what actions I can take. If we were told about it, we would all be less worried. There'd be collective action. As young people, we shouldn't be having anxiety and be stressed and figuring out, oh, what comes first, my homework or saving the world? Like, that is not our job. So thank you so much to everyone for coming, and I'm now going to hand back to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, guys. That was really interesting. It was great to get lots of different opinions. There was definitely questions there about how to include others, how to include as many young people as possible into becoming more aware about the climate crisis. And for me, I think from our perspective as an anti-racism organisation, accessibility is so important. Even taking time to pronunciate people's names properly is really, it seems like such a small minor thing, but for us, for individuals with, different names, maybe more challenging names, it means a lot. And it's just those small things that make participation really important. So thank you again to all the young people, absolutely brilliant. This was obviously the last event, but in future, hopefully we'll be seeing you again. I'm sure we will on your journey. So thank you so much.